What if I told you that one of the most beloved men in television history was secretly living through one of the most painful lives in Hollywood? What if the man who played the unbreakable hero, the guy with the Ferrari, the mustache, the $1 million smile, was quietly carrying losses so heavy that most people would have collapsed under the weight? What if the same year he became a household name watched by 60 million Americans, the only thing that truly mattered to him was already slipping through his fingers? What if he turned down James Bond? What if he turned down Indiana Jones? Not because he didn't want them, but because he believed in something old-fashioned and rare, a promise. What if after 50 years of showing up and never breaking, after anchoring one of the longest-running dramas in CBS history, the network continued his show, his franchise, his world, and simply didn't invite him back? And what if through all of it, every loss, every door that closed, every body part that stopped cooperating, he never once made it somebody else's problem? You think you know Tom Selleck, the mustache, Magnum PI Frank Reagan at the Sunday dinner table, but you don't know what it cost him to stay standing. You don't know what broke first, what he lost that nobody photographed, or what he is still carrying at 81 years old on 60 acres where the cameras can't reach. That's what we're here for today. And I promise you, by the time this is over, you will never watch him the same way again. Tom Selleck was born on January 29, 1945, in Detroit, Michigan. The war in Europe still had months left to run. America was holding its breath somewhere between sacrifice and celebration, between the men who had not yet come home and the future that had not yet taken shape. Robert Dean Selleck and Martha Jagger Selleck welcomed their second son into that particular American moment and named him Thomas William Selleck. He weighed nothing yet. He had not yet learned to carry things. But carrying things, silently, steadily, without complaint, would become the defining characteristic of his entire life. The family didn't stay in Detroit long. Tom was still young when they moved to California, settling in Sherman Oaks in the San Fernando Valley. Post-war California, sunlit and optimistic and expanding in a way that felt almost deliberate, as if the state itself had decided to become the physical embodiment of a fresh start. His father, Robert, was a real estate executive, serious, disciplined, a man who believed that effort produced outcomes, and that outcomes were the only honest measure of a life. His mother, Martha, was warm where Robert was exacting, but she understood the arithmetic of discipline too. Together they built a household where achievement was expected and excuses were examined carefully before being accepted. Tom was the tall one. He was always the tall one. By the time he reached Grant High School in the Valley, he stood above almost every boy in his class. His body had begun to suggest the kind of presence that coaches notice before they know anything else about you. He was coordinated and competitive and serious in the way tall boys often are, aware from an early age that size makes you visible whether you choose to be or not. He played baseball. He played basketball. He was good at both, not effortlessly, but with a focused intensity that looked effortless to everyone watching. Basketball was the dream, not a vague childhood fantasy. A real dream with specific dimensions and a specific destination. Tom Selleck wanted to play professional basketball. He wanted it the way young men want things when they are still young enough to believe that wanting something completely is enough to make it happen. He was recruited by the University of Southern California on a basketball scholarship and arrived on campus with the quiet confidence that comes from being genuinely good at something you love. Then reality delivered its first lesson, and it was not gentle. He played 7 games for the USC Trojans. 7 games. In those 7 appearances, he scored a total of 4 points. 4 points across 7 games for a young man who had built his identity around the belief that he was destined for something larger. The coaches were not cruel. The university was not unkind. The simple and devastating truth was that the level of competition at a major program revealed with total clarity the gap between being exceptional in high school and being exceptional at the level where exceptional is merely the minimum requirement for belonging. He scored 4 points. Then he stopped playing. Here is what matters. Here is the thing that tells you everything you need to know about who Tom Selleck would become. He did not collapse. He did not turn bitter against the sport or the coaches or himself. He did what men of a certain formation do when the thing they wanted most reveals itself as unavailable. He looked around for the next true thing and moved toward it with the same focused seriousness he had brought to the basketball court. He found theater. It happened almost by accident, the way genuine vocations sometimes do, arriving sideways through a door you weren't watching. A modeling class. A suggestion from someone who noticed how he moved, how he inhabited a room, how his face did something interesting when he wasn't performing, but simply being present. He began studying acting with a seriousness that surprised people who had only ever seen him as an athlete. He had, it turned out, an instinct for stillness, for the particular kind of controlled restraint that separates actors who indicate emotions from actors who actually live inside a moment. The camera, when he finally stood before one, seemed to recognize something in him that was already there. But recognition is not the same as opportunity. An opportunity in Hollywood is not the same as success. The years between his first auditions and his first meaningful roles were long, honest years in the way that long waitings always are. He graduated from USC. He took whatever work was available, commercials, small television parts, the steady accumulation of minor credits that constitute a career before a career has actually arrived. He appeared in episodic television in the early 1970s with the unremarkable frequency of a man doing the work without any certainty that the work would ever add up to anything. During those years, he did something else entirely. Something that doesn't appear in the celebrity highlight reels because it doesn't photograph well and doesn't translate into the language of glamour that Hollywood prefers. From 1967 to 1973, Tom Selleck served in the California Army National Guard. He was 22 when he began his service. The Vietnam War was not a backdrop during those years. It was the foreground. It was the fact that organized every other fact. Young men of Tom Selleck's generation carried the draft in their bodies the way they carried their own heartbeats, constant, impossible to stop being aware of. He served his 6 years. He did not speak about it extensively in later interviews. He did not use it as a credential or a personal mythology. He simply served, and then he returned to the work of becoming whatever he was going to become, carrying the experience inward, integrated, expressed not in words, but in the particular quality of seriousness that marked everything he did afterward. The first marriage came in 1971. Her name was Jackie Ray. She was an actress, and she understood, as only someone inside the same uncertain world can understand, what it means to love someone who is still becoming. She was there during the auditions that went nowhere, and the callbacks that never came. She was there when the phone didn't ring, and when it rang, and the part went to someone else. She believed in something in him before the world had given her any concrete reason to believe. He would later say that she was essential to those years, that her faith during the silence was a form of grace he did not fully comprehend while he was living inside it. In 1976, something shifted. He landed a recurring role on The Young and the Restless. Then came a role in a television movie. Then came a brief, significant, almost unbelievable moment. He was offered the role of James Bond. The producers wanted him. He was nearly cast. And then a prior commitment prevented him from accepting. He watched someone else become James Bond. He went back to work. Then in 1980, the phone rang with a different weight. CBS had a new show. It was set in Hawaii. It was called Magnum, P.I. They wanted Tom Selleck for the lead. A private investigator named Thomas Sullivan Magnum, a Vietnam veteran living on a wealthy author's estate, solving crimes with a red Ferrari and a particular kind of masculine warmth that nobody had quite put on television before. It was the role of a lifetime. It was, in every meaningful sense, the moment that everything before had been building toward. He said yes. Of course he said yes. What Tom Selleck could not have known in that moment was that fame does not arrive alone. It brings with it a set of forces that reorganize everything around you, including the things you most wanted to keep unchanged. The career he had spent a decade building was about to become something he had never quite imagined. And the marriage that had held him together through all the silent years was about to face a pressure it had never been asked to survive. The light had finally found him. But light at a certain intensity does not illuminate. It burns. Magnum P.I. premiered on December 11, 1980. And within weeks, Tom Selleck understood something that no amount of waiting had prepared him for. Fame is not a reward. Fame is a weather system. It does not arrive and then settle. It moves constantly around you, reshaping the atmosphere of every room you enter, every relationship you carry. Every morning you wake up believing you are still the same person who wanted something as simple and honest as a basketball scholarship. You are not that person anymore. The world will not let you be. The show was an immediate phenomenon, not a slow build. An explosion of public attention so immediate and so total that Tom Selleck went from recognizable to inescapable in the space of a single broadcast season. 60 million viewers. The mustache became iconic. The red Ferrari became iconic. The laugh became iconic. Thomas Sullivan Magnum became almost overnight one of the most beloved characters in the history of American television. And somewhere inside all of that, Thomas William Selleck began very quietly to disappear. The marriage to Jackie Ray did not survive the first years of Magnum's fame. Tom Selleck has never broadcast the details. Not because he is evasive, but because he is the particular kind of man who believes that the interior of a marriage belongs to the two people who lived inside it. What he has said across decades of interviews adds up to something clear and painful. The fame came too fast. The demands were total. The man who had spent 10 years being passed over was suddenly the man everyone wanted, which meant the man Jackie had chosen. The one who came home uncertain and tried again the next morning had been replaced by something larger and less personal and impossible to hold. They divorced in 1982. Tom Selleck has described it, without drama or self-pity, as the worst thing that ever happened to him. Sit with that sentence for a moment. Consider it against the full inventory of his life. Consider it against the basketball dream that ended in 4 points in 7 games. Against 6 years of National Guard service. Against a decade of auditions and small parts and near misses. Against the James Bond role he almost had and couldn't take. Against everything that came after. The physical damage, the cancellations, the exclusions, the arthritis that would eventually require a stunt double for the simple act of getting out of a car. Against all of that, the worst thing that ever happened to him was the end of a marriage. That tells you who Tom Selleck actually is underneath the mustache, and the Ferraris, and the 60 million viewers. It tells you what he actually valued. The fame, for all its intensity, was never the thing. The thing was always the private life. The connection. The ordinary, irreplaceable, daily belonging to someone who knew you before the world had an opinion about you. The divorce cost him something else too. Something he rarely mentions, and the tabloids rarely tracked, because it didn't photograph with the same drama as the split itself. He lost his relationship with Kevin, Jackie's son from a previous relationship, the boy he had helped raise during the years of silence and small credits and carefully rationed hope. The stepfather bond built across years of shared ordinary life could not survive the reorganization that divorce demands. Kevin moved in a different direction. Tom Selleck moved in the direction the show required. The space between them widened in the way spaces widen when no one is deliberately tending to them. Gradually, then permanently. He carried that quietly too. Magnum P.I. ran for 8 seasons and 162 episodes. Tom Selleck brought to Thomas Magnum something the role, as written, did not strictly require but absolutely needed. A genuine emotional intelligence. A capacity for warmth that stopped just short of sentimentality. A physical ease in the body that made even the action sequences feel inhabited rather than performed. He was not playing a hero. He was playing a man. And the distinction is the entire reason the show worked. The awards came. The Emmy in 1984 for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series. The Golden Globe nominations. The magazine covers and the appearances and the interviews in which he was always gracious and always thoughtful and always somehow slightly out of reach, as though the most famous version of himself was something he was performing for others while the actual self stayed behind the mustache, private watching. And then came the decision that still stops people cold when they hear it. During the run of Magnum, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas came calling. They wanted Tom Selleck for Indiana Jones. By every external measure, it was the role of a generation. Spielberg wanted him, Lucas wanted him, and Tom Selleck wanted it. But his contract with CBS for Magnum was absolute. He could not take it. He watched Harrison Ford become Indiana Jones. He went back to Hawaii and filmed another season, and did not publicly express a single word of regret. What he said years later was characteristic. He said he believed in honoring commitments. He said a contract meant something. He said that was the end of it. That is Tom Selleck's relationship with regret. He acknowledges the door, names what was behind it, and then closes the conversation with the same quiet authority he brings to everything else. The loss is real. The loss is not dwelt upon. Life continues in the direction that chosen obligations point. In 1987, Gilly Mack arrived. She was a British actress and dancer, and she was the kind of woman who, from every account, did not need Tom Selleck to be famous in order to find him worth knowing. They married in August of that year in a ceremony so private that the press, accustomed to treating celebrity marriages as public entertainment, barely had photographs to publish. They have been married ever since. 39 years and counting, in a culture that treats long marriages as either suspicious or miraculous depending on how closely you're watching. Their daughter, Hannah Selleck, was born in December 1988. She became a professional equestrian, competing at an elite level. She is her father's daughter in the particular way that children who grow up watching a parent practice quiet excellence tend to reflect that excellence in their own chosen discipline. Tom Selleck speaks of Hannah with a reverence that is visible even through the measured language he uses for everything personal. The family settled at a ranch in Hidden Valley near Thousand Oaks, California. 60 acres of working land that had once belonged to Dean Martin. Tom Selleck bought it and made it his not as a trophy property or a celebrity retreat, but as an actual working ranch, a place where the soil required attention and the fences required maintenance and the avocado trees required care across seasons, indifferent to whatever was happening on the other side of the camera. He planted things and watched them grow. He repaired things with his hands. He worked the land in the early mornings before the industry could reach him. And the ranch became over the decades the realest version of his life. The thing that existed independent of ratings and renewals, and the perpetual uncertainty of a career built on other people's decisions. Through the 1990s, his television work continued with the steady reliability of a man who understood exactly what he was and made no apologies for it. He chose projects with a consistency of character that critics occasionally called limited and audiences consistently called trustworthy. He knew who he was. He served that identity faithfully. And the audience never stopped showing up. The Jesse Stone film series began in 2005. 8 television movies based on the Robert B. Parker novels. In Jesse Stone, a sheriff quietly battling alcohol dependence and the particular loneliness of a man out of place in the world he has been assigned, Tom Selleck found a role that allowed him to work at a depth the action hero years rarely required. Jesse Stone was not Magnum with a different hat. Jesse Stone was grief made functional. Jesse Stone was the man who shows up despite everything, who does the job despite everything, who chooses every single day to stay standing despite everything. It is not difficult to understand why Tom Selleck was drawn to that character. It is not difficult to understand why he stayed with those films for nearly 2 decades. Then came Blue Bloods. The show premiered in 2010 on CBS, and Tom Selleck joined it as Frank Reagan, New York City Police Commissioner, patriarch of a family of law enforcement officers, a man whose authority derived not from force but from principle. It was in structural terms the role he had been building toward since he first learned to hold stillness in front of a camera. Frank Reagan required everything Tom Selleck knew how to do: the weight of restraint, the economy of expression, the capacity to fill a room with presence without consuming all the air in it. The show ran for 14 seasons and 292 episodes. It became one of the longest-running dramas in CBS history and made Tom Selleck the most watched actor on American network television during the decade of its peak success. Frank Reagan's Sunday dinners became cultural touchstones. The character's combination of old-fashioned authority and genuine moral seriousness resonated with an audience perhaps hungry for a version of fatherhood that did not condescend to the difficulty of the role. But television runs are not eternal, and this one ended in 2024. The cancellation was not entirely unexpected after 14 seasons, but the manner of what followed left a mark that Tom Selleck has addressed with characteristic restraint. A spin-off was announced. The Blue Bloods universe would continue. Certain cast members would carry the torch into the next iteration. Tom Selleck was not among them. He was not invited to participate in Boston Blue. The man who had anchored the franchise for 14 years, who had been the gravitational center around which 292 episodes organized themselves, was excluded from the continuation of the world he had helped build. The network made its calculation. The network moved forward. And Tom Selleck, at 80 years old, found himself on the outside of something that bore his fingerprints on every surface. He said very little publicly. Of course he didn't. What he said to those who asked was that he understood the business, that he had no bitterness, that he wished the new production well. It is possible every one of those statements was entirely sincere. It is also possible that sincerity and pain can occupy the same sentence without one canceling the other. And underneath all of it, the body was keeping its own record. The arthritis had been building for years. The accumulation of a physical life lived at maximum intensity for 5 decades. The action sequences, the horseback riding, the ranch work, the simple grinding arithmetic of a large body moving through demanding physical labor across a lifetime. By the final seasons of Blue Bloods, the damage had reached the point where the production required accommodations. Sources on set described a man in constant pain. A man who prepared meticulously for every scene because preparation was one of the things he could still fully control. A man who required assistance with movements that had once been effortless. Not because his will had diminished, but because his body had finally presented the bill for everything he had asked of it. A stunt double for stepping out of a car. There is something in that image that resists easy interpretation. It is not simply sad, though it is sad. It is not simply heroic, though there is something genuinely heroic in continuing to show up when showing up has become costly. It is perhaps the most honest image of aging that celebrity culture rarely allows. The gap between who you were and what your body will now permit, navigated in full view of cameras and crew and an audience that prefers its icons frozen at their peak. Tom Selleck did not freeze. He showed up. He sat at the Sunday dinner table as Frank Reagan and delivered the lines and held the silences and carried the room the way he had always carried rooms, while the body beneath the suit quietly negotiated its own separate terms. For 50 years, he played men who never broke. The body was always going to have the final word. He just made sure it had to wait until he was finished. There is a ranch in Hidden Valley, California, where the mornings arrive before the rest of the world remembers to look. The light comes in low and unhurried across 60 acres of working land. Across the avocado trees Tom Selleck planted with his own hands. Across the fences he has repaired season after season. Not because a man of his means cannot hire someone to repair them, but because the act of repair, of showing up to something broken and making it whole again, is the thing itself. It is not a metaphor for him. It is simply what the morning requires. And he has always been a man who does what the morning requires. He is 81 years old. He wakes before dawn and moves carefully through the body he has earned. The body that carries the record of every physical demand 5 decades of work placed upon it. The body that continues despite the arthritis, despite the accumulated damage, despite the gap between what it once did without thought and what it now requires deliberate effort to accomplish. He does not complain about this in public. He has never complained about anything in public that could be reframed as weakness, because he was formed in a time and in a tradition that treated the private endurance of difficulty as a form of basic dignity. But here on the ranch, in the early light before the industry and the interviews and the careful management of a public self that has been carefully managed for 50 years, here he is simply a man in a body doing the work the land asks of him. Jilly is there. She has been there for 39 years, which in the arithmetic of Hollywood marriages is not simply an achievement, but a quiet revolution. She did not need him to be Magnum to love him. She did not need the Emmy or the ratings or the magazine covers or the Sunday dinners as Frank Reagan. She chose repeatedly and across decades the man behind all of that. The one who gets up before dawn and works the soil and comes in with dirt on his hands and does not perform gratitude, but simply lives inside it. That is the marriage. That is what survived when the career went through its seasons of abundance and its seasons of loss. Hannah is there too, in the way adult children are there, present in the life shaped by her father, carrying forward something of what he built without being required to replicate it. She chose horses and competition, and the discipline of excellence in a field where her father's name opens no particular doors. She earned what she has with the focused seriousness that is unmistakably inherited. Tom Selleck watches her compete and understands, in the way parents understand things that exceed language, that the most important thing he ever produced did not air on CBS. He is still working. The Jesse Stone project remains in conversation. He has been talking with Taylor Sheridan, the architect of the new American Western on television, a man who understands how to write characters whose age is not a limitation, but the entire point. Tom Selleck is not approaching these conversations as a man chasing relevance. He is approaching them as a man who has work left in him and believes without sentimentality that unused capacity is its own form of loss. He has said, simply and without performance, that he wants to work as long as they'll have him. He has said, simply and without performance, that he wants to work as long as they'll have him. That sentence deserves to be heard slowly, the way he would deliver it, without urgency, without the faint desperation that clings to public statements made by men who are actually afraid. It is not a plea. It is a declaration of intention from a man who has always understood that the work was the point, that the work was the thing that organized everything else around it. That stopping the work, not the fame, not the recognition, not the public life, but the actual disciplined labor of inhabiting a character fully and honestly, would be its own kind of diminishment. He is not afraid of aging. He is afraid of stopping. That distinction matters enormously. And it is the distinction that separates Tom Selleck from the version of celebrity aging that Hollywood tends to produce. The desperate maintenance of an image. The resistance to time as though time were an opponent rather than simply the medium through which a life moves. He let the mustache go gray. He let the face record what the years have written on it. He let the body negotiate its own terms with the work, quietly, without making the negotiation the story. What the exclusion from Boston Blue cost him is something only he fully knows. 14 years of Sunday dinners and moral seriousness, and the particular satisfaction of being the gravitational center of something that matters to millions of people. And then the door closes, not because you failed, but because the calculation changed and you were on the wrong side of it. That is the entertainment industry at its most honest, and its honesty is not gentle. He did not make it the story. He moved toward the next thing. That is the through line. That is what connects the boy who scored 4 points in 7 games at USC and set the basketball down without drama, to the man who watched Harrison Ford become Indiana Jones and went back to Hawaii to film another season. That is what connects the divorce he has called the worst thing that ever happened to him to the marriage that has lasted 39 years since. That is what connects the stunt double on a Blue Bloods set to the conversations currently happening about Jesse Stone and Taylor Sheridan and what comes next. The through line is not stoicism as performance. It is stoicism as genuine orientation, a fundamental belief, never articulated, because men of his formation do not articulate their fundamental beliefs. That difficulty is not an argument against continuing, that loss is not a verdict, that the morning will come again and requires something of you, and the only honest response is to be ready. He was not given an easy passage. The basketball dream closed at 4 points. The first marriage could not survive what fame did to the air around it. The stepson drifted. Indiana Jones went to someone else. James Bond went to someone else. The franchise he anchored for 14 years continued without him. The body that carried him through 5 decades of physical performance now requires negotiation for movements it once completed without a thought. He endured all of it without making any of it a public grievance. He endured all of it and planted avocado trees and repaired fences and read scripts and said yes to the work when the work was worth saying yes to. And no one ever quite asked what it cost him to stay standing, because he was so profoundly good at staying standing that the cost became invisible. But the cost was real. The cost is always real. And perhaps that is what 81 looks like when you have lived it honestly. Not the absence of damage, but the presence of something that outlasted the damage. The ranch, the marriage, the daughter who competes with her father's seriousness in a field of her own choosing. The work that is still quietly in conversation. He planted trees he will not always be around to harvest. That is not sadness. That is faith. And faith at 81 on 60 acres in Hidden Valley looks exactly like a man who is still quietly showing up. Now you know what it cost him. And if that kind of endurance, not the glamour, not the mustache, not the 60 million viewers, but the getting up before dawn and doing the work and carrying the losses without letting them become the story. If that moves something in you, then you already know why this man has never really left us. He just keeps showing up. That's always been the whole point.